2019 Belmont Stakes, a 10-horse field. Let's take a look from the rail, starting with Joe Avia. Joe Avia was the horse that some of you may remember that caused a lot of the trouble in the Wood Memorial Stakes at the beginning when he came in from that 11th post and veered in and kind of took out a couple of horses and caused some traffic trouble. Then after that, he proceeded to lose and kind of fade after dueling with some pretty fast fractions early on, losing by 13 lengths in a race that Tacitus won and Tax ran second. We'll take a look at those contenders later on. Followed that up with a 2-length win in the Long Branch Stakes. That was a 4-horse field, and I'm not a big believer in horse races that have only 4 or 5 horse fields. I just don't think it's a true test. I think just kind of the alpha horse wins. And so Javia from the rail, he'll provide a little bit of pace and speed, but hardly not likely to get the 12 furlong distance of the Belmont Stakes. Meanwhile, Big Sandy, ever fast, Dale Romans, he ran second at 30-1 in the Preakness Stakes. Now, he did also have a second place at 128-1 in the Holy Bull earlier this year, but kind of what you see is what you get with this horse. 11 lifetime starts, only 1 win, and that's going pretty far back in the past performances at this point. He's mixed up those second place finishes with a 10-length loss in the Pat Day Mile, a 15-length loss in the Florida Derby, and an 18-length loss on the Fountain of Youth. He does kind of seem to be in better form right now. I just can't see him winning this race. Not enough speed to kind of really stay close, yet I'm not sure he can really punch it in late either. So I definitely think he's kind of a long shot in this spot, 12-1 on the morning line. Master Fencer, the horse from Japan, he closed in the Derby, but again, this is kind of a marketing gimmick by Belmont Park. These horses just don't win. They're not even meant to win. They're here to have fun, and they can't compete with American dirt horses at the classic distance. So I'm not a big believer in Master Fencer. He also had some issues last week in a workout, stumbling. He hasn't looked really that great training since then. I think Master Fencer is going to find it hard to compete against these type of horses. Now we start to get to the contenders. Tax, here's a horse that finished in the money in the Wood Memorial and also won the Withers. You know, that speed figure is still, I think, a little on the high side. They gave it a 96 on the Beyer scale. It was also ranked pretty high on the time form ranking scale as well. Was claimed out of a $50,000 maiden claimer back at Keeneland, and I think his best chance is to show a little bit of speed, kind of be in that mix after 7 furlongs to a mile, and really just see if he can slow down the pace. So Tax is kind of interesting from a pace standpoint and being near the pace. I'm not sure that he can finish late in the race. Bourbon War, this is a horse who was bet down in the Preakness Stakes and did not run well. Blinkers are off today, and he was inside early. He had the 2-post position in the Preakness and then ended up getting switched to the outside and just never fired. I think he is a lot better than he showed in that race, and the fact that they're wheeling him back in a couple of weeks gets Mike Smith, who'll be riding in his 21st Belmont Stakes. I think there's a chance he could kind of be in the mix here. Bourbon War is definitely a contender. He is a closer, so the running style doesn't really suit him for this race, but I do think once he gets moving and if he kind of can get a clear trip, I think he can outfinish a few of these horses. Spinoff, his best race was in the Louisiana Derby. Here's a look at the Louisiana Derby, and Spinoff is the 10 horse and gets a good trip. What I like best about this is how patient he was waiting on the turn for the speed to kind of fade back. And the key to the Belmont is waiting. And if he can relax and sit patiently, he may have the most raw speed of the Belmont horses. He's out here. He's got the lead. So I think Spinoff is a live contender if he can get the right trip. Kentucky Derby, you know, he acted up in the paddock before while they were saddling, and the big crowd kind of got to him. And I think he's another who's capable of showing a lot better form in this race. Hard spun out of a Gone West mare, actually a Grade 1 winning Gone West mare, Zaftig. Castellano takes the call, and Todd Pletcher has done well with 3 Belmont winners. He's also had some close luck second place finishers. So I think Spinoff is definitely live in this spot. Sir Winston closed in the Peter Pan. That got a high buyer speed figure. The winner, very impressive in that race, Global Campaign. I think we'll hear from him a little bit later on this year, possibly next year. But Global Campaign is a nice horse. So running second to that horse. Problem is with Sir Winston, he's a total stretch runner, and that's different than a closer. A closer comes from behind, starts to make their move going into the turn. Both of his closing finishes, both in the Withers and the Tampa Bay Derby, he did all of his running down the stretch. And it's hard to win races when you only do your running down the stretch. So Sir Winston, Joel Rosario on the saddle, 12-1 in the morning line. He's interesting, but again, he's another horse with 9 lifetime races, only 2 wins. I'm not sure really what the upside is. I think he needs more of a pace collapse to do his best running. Intrepid Heart, this is a horse with only 3 lifetime races. Now, Tappets have won 3 of the last 5 Belmonts, and there's 3 Tappets in the race. There's Bourbon War, who's by Tappet, Intrepid Heart, who's by Tappet, and the favorite Tacitus is also by Tappet. So he is a horse that, he was put to a drive early in that Keeneland race, and I kind of like that. He was all out to beat a horse, High Crime, who had a little bit of a speed edge and kind of led them all the way around. Blinkers are on for Intrepid Heart. He did stumble at the beginning of the Peter Pan, and then he kind of got hung out wide on the turn and kind of mistimed his move, but he was still running at the end of the race. Intrepid Heart is a very live contender in this race. I think he's going to be closer to the pace with those blinkers on. That's one common thing that Todd Pletcher does. His horses run well in the Belmont because they have enough speed to get close to the pace. It's usually a smaller field, and that speed can take him a long way. Destin ran very well after disappointing in the Kentucky Derby. He's had Tappert, who won the Belmont Stakes. He also had the filly Rags to Riches, coming off an Oaks victory, kind of just grinded away down the stretch on Curlin. So I definitely think Intrepid Heart is a live contender, and Intrepid Heart is my selection in this race to win the Belmont Stakes. I think he has enough speed to lay close to the pace. I think he had a rougher tripper than it looks in the Peter Pan, and I think 10-1 is fair odds in this race. War of Will, co-favored along with Tacitus. I think he's going to be the second favorite on the board. He's by Warfront, so that's still a little bit of a concern of getting the 10 furlongs. He had a perfect trip in the Preakness Stakes. He stayed at the rail all the way around and then kind of exploded when Warrior's Charge drifted out at the top of the lane. The speed figure did not come back that high, and overall the Belmont field is tougher than the Preakness Stakes. Everfast remains in this field, but you replace Owendale with Tacitus in this race, and you also add some more speed with Spinoff and Intrepid Heart, who has a little bit more room to improve. So the Belmont field is a little bit tougher. I'm not sure he's going to get the same type of trip that he got in the Preakness Stakes, and I'm not sure he wants 12 furlongs. He's capable of winning this race, but at 2-1, I think he's a little bit of an underlay, and he does have a chance to finish off the board. He has not worked out since April 27th. He did not work out between the Derby and the Preakness, and he has not worked out in the 3 weeks between the Preakness and the Belmont. They may be squeezing the lemon just a little bit dry here in the Belmont Stakes. Tacitus, the outside horse, another one by Tappet. This is an example of a horse being favored, not really by his accomplishments, but people are projecting what they think he's going to do in this race. Looking at the Wood Memorial, this race was a speed duel, and there was a couple of speed horses that collapsed, and Tacitus, the gray horse sitting in fourth, was able to grind away and really being put to a drive with 4 furlongs to go. If you notice, he doesn't really quicken. He grinds away for a quarter of a mile, and he doesn't really have the ability to separate. The key thing to remember with Tacitus is that he has a grade 1 winning mare, Close Hatches. He has New York connections in Belmont. Jose Ortiz is the rider, and he won the Wood Memorial, but he was a couple of lengths from finishing 9th in the Kentucky Derby. He grinded away in the Wood Memorial. People want him to be good. I think if he wins this race, there'll be a lot of talk about how he's going to go to the Breeders' Cup Classic and compete in some of these bigger New York races this summer, like the Travers and the Jockey Club. But I'm not so sure he's there yet. He's got a grinding style, he's got a good pedigree, but they're kind of betting on projecting what he's going to do versus what he really has done. And those sometimes are vulnerable favorites. So when I look at this race, I look at it as Intrepid Heart and Bourbon War are my top two selections. I also like Spinoff. I think he's going to float up to 15, 16 to 1. But I think Intrepid Heart at 10 to 1 has a good shot. I think Tacitus is a little bit vulnerable. And I think War of Will is going to be overbet based on kind of a Preakness victory where he had the perfect trip, got the golden rail down the stretch, and a hole open for him. He did not defeat Everfast by that much. Owendale was closing on him, and I think Bourbon War is going to run a lot better race in here, and he was lower odds than War of Will in the Preakness. And I think Intrepid Heart, also coming off a rough trip, has a chance to win the Test of Champions here at beautiful Belmont Park. Should be a good and exciting edition of the Belmont Stakes. Forecast for 75-degree weather, sunny skies, should be dry the whole day, and a chance to really start to separate the top horses in this crop. We'll see if Bourbon War can step it up. We'll see if Spinoff can rebound out of the Kentucky Derby, and we'll see if Tacitus can back and fulfill some of that promise that he has shown in previous races. The 2019 Belmont Stakes.